Hello, my name is Leah. Welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to share with you 7 mistakes that I made as a newbie writer. Hopefully, maybe this can help you if you are new avoid them. Maybe give some guidance and advice, or at the very least, it will be funny to me at least to look back at how naive young little Leah was in the past. To pair with this, I also wrote a post over on my Ko-fi blog about 5 things I did well as a newbie writer. So if you want to go see kind of the flip side of this, you can find that link down below. And if you want to see more blog posts from me, you can go follow me on Ko-fi because I post every week on there doing a blog for writers. It's a little bit more advice oriented over there, so go check that out if you're interested. But without further ado, let's jump into my list of 7 mistakes that I made as a newbie writer. The first one is expecting perfection. You'd think that this would be an obvious mistake to avoid, but I have a perfectionist complex. I literally go into every new activity thinking that I'm just gonna be a natural. I'm gonna have just like this innate talent that's gonna make it super easy and fun to do, and I'm not gonna have to work as hard as other people to get good at it. Yeah. No. Natural talent is great, but even if you are like one of the most gifted writers on this planet, no first draft, no first like attempt at writing is gonna be perfect. Especially because perfect implies that there's like an objectively right or wrong answer. And of course, with anything creative, with anything artistic, there's not really going to be an objective like yes or no answer to something like that. I'm definitely in the camp that you can objectively evaluate art because there are ways to do that. Like there are things that are generally agreed upon that make something good or bad, but you can't ever get to like that ultimate like final yes or no, this is perfect, this is not. And so for me as a new writer to go in being like, I'm gonna write this book and it's gonna be a bestseller immediately, those expectations are just a little bit out of whack. It's obviously easier said than done to like say you should go into something with this mindset or not thinking like this, because I knew like from hearing from other writers, especially on YouTube, that it wasn't gonna be perfect. But there was like this little small part of me that I couldn't quite quiet that was like, but what if it is? This can be a maybe depressing thing, knowing that you're gonna have to work really hard to do anything good in writing. But at the same time, I think that it can be very freeing to know that you don't have to get it right the first time. You don't have to put all that pressure on yourself. And it's okay to sort of lean into that imperfection and just like really recognize when it's there so that you can grow from it and so that you can identify like those places that you need to work on and that you need to practice to get better at. Because the sooner you can do that, the sooner you can look at yourself, look at your own skills, and sort of figure out where you're good, where you're not good, the quicker you're going to progress as a writer. Mistake number 2 that I did as a newbie writer was comparing my own skills, writing pace, talent, writing style, writing preferences, all of that sort of thing to other writers. This sort of ties into the perfectionism thing in the sense of obviously my first draft of my first novel is not going to be anywhere near as good as like a published novel that's on the shelf. But beyond that, something that I found myself doing a lot as a newbie writer was looking at what other writers and authors were doing and thinking that I should be doing that exact thing. I think a discussion that comes up quite often here on AuthorTube is that whole idea around word count goals, and especially that comes up around NaNoWriMo. It was very difficult for me as a new writer to see people getting like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 words in a day and that just be like their standard across the board, whereas I was over there struggling to get 500 words in a day. And when I did get 500 words, I was like, this is amazing. I've worked literally all day to get these 500 words. But then to get online and see someone else talking about how they got 3,000 words. Similarly, there's a lot of discussion around pantsing versus plotting, different outlining styles, different ways to just go about the process of crafting a book. I find on AuthorTube specifically, and on a lot of internet spaces talking about writing, people are pretty flexible with this. Like for the most part, people will say do what works for you, but there's a few old school writers, I think, a few prolific authors who are out there saying like their way is the only way, and if you don't do it their way, you're not a real writer, you're a hack, you're not doing it in a way that's gonna create the best version of your story. I fell into more of the word count comparison, the pacing comparison, rather than this one, but I did also find myself looking up to some of these like very prolific, very well-known authors and thinking, well, they've done it, obviously. They know what they're talking about. They're professional at this. So what they're saying about it must be true. Like, I must have to do it in this way. But all it takes is like literally 2 seconds of research to realize that even amongst those like high profile prolific authors, they all have different processes, and all of those different processes work for them. So the longer I write, the longer I practice at this and try different methods, different strategies, and sort of figure out what works for me and how to incorporate that into my writing habits and my writing routines, the more I realize it literally is very personal. It's what keeps you inspired, what gets you motivated to sit down in front of the keyboard or with a pen in hand. Even that can be something that people are like, no, you have to type, or no, you have to handwrite your first draft. Like, it's so ridiculous. Whatever gets you to put words on the page, whatever will get you to that final book, do that. And as a new writer, experiment with all the different things and just see what works for you. Mistake number 3 that I made as a new writer was trying too hard to be original. Caveat here. Obviously, we want to be original. We want to write a story that impacts people, that people don't think is too derivative, like all of that kind of stuff. So it's not that that is a bad thing to be striving for, but it is also important to remember that whole saying, adage, whatever, surrounding the fact that there are no new stories. Every story has been told, and the differentiations really come whenever we're reflecting like our modern culture, come from the different authors themselves, because each person kind of brings their own life experience into a story and crafts it in a way that is unique to them. But this idea that I, as a new writer, have to write something completely original, no one's ever done it before, never been seen on this earth, puts a lot of pressure on the new writer to do something that's pretty impossible, especially for someone so new. For me, when I first started writing, I knew I wasn't going to do that. I knew I wasn't going to be like, this story is going to change the world. People have never seen anything like it. I knew I wasn't gonna do that. But in an effort to try to get as close to that as possible, when I had an idea that reminded me too much of something I'd read before, or when I read something and was inspired by that thing and said, I want to do something like that in my book, I would put a lot of arbitrary stuff around it in order to make it unique. I wasn't really concerned with making choices that worked for the story. I was much more concerned with just trying to do sort of the most outlandish thing, the most unique, never thought of before spin on something that had already been done. And what that created was a draft that was very hollow. It felt like all those other stories that I was trying to differentiate myself from, but much worse because a lot of the details just didn't have anything to do with the actual story. So don't try so hard to be unique that you sort of sacrifice that core of your story, you sacrifice the thing that you're actually trying to say. Mistake number 4 that I made as a new writer was not making an effort to understand my own pace and my own writing style. So this again kind of ties into that whole comparing myself to others, but this one is much more on the personal side. I didn't make a huge effort at the beginning to sort of evaluate what worked for me and figure out how I could best set myself up for success. Success being finishing the book, basically. For example, I have been setting terrible word count goals for a very long time. And it wasn't the fact that I was setting word count goals that was the problem, because I do think that those really do work for me. It was just that I never really sat down to evaluate what my actual pace was. So I had no concept for how much I could actually get done in a month, in a week. I had a vague concept of what I could do in a day, but I stuck to that as like a hard and fast number rather than something that fluctuates depending on how busy I am. And so for a very long time, probably for like 2 or 3 years, I was setting goals that I quite consistently failed at. Like, I was making progress and it was good progress, but I was failing all of my goals because they were unrealistic, they were way too high, and I was holding myself to a standard that I wasn't really able to meet. Whereas the progress that I made was good progress. I could have just made that my goal and been happy with it. And so it's important as a new writer to look at this time as a time to really evaluate yourself and figure out your style, your pace, all of those sorts of things, so that you can make those realistic goals later, so that you can use that information, work within that information, in order to get the thing done. Because like I said, even though I made really good progress during that time, I was always feeling like terrible about my writing and feeling like I wasn't a good writer and I wasn't cut out for this, all because I wasn't meeting my arbitrary goals that I had set for myself, even though I didn't even know how to set those goals. You see what I mean? Mistake number 5 I made as a newbie writer was not treating my writing space, as special. This is partly a symptom of me having been in college when I first started writing, especially my first book. I was living in the dorm room, which was loud. I was sharing my room with someone else, which is just not super conducive for the way that I write personally. And so I was going to the library, the cafeteria, or to like the student union and all these different places to kind of escape that in order to go write elsewhere. I would also write on my bed a lot, even though I had a desk in my room. And so all of these sort of factors made me not really have like a spot for writing. And this mistake I will caveat with going back to the whole figuring out what works for you. If doing that, if bouncing around to keep it fresh works for you, then you can ignore this as a mistake, because this is only a mistake for me personally because my brain much prefers having like a dedicated single space to work at. So the mistake for you might be thinking you needed a dedicated single space to work at, when really what you needed to do was bounce around and keep it fresh. I sort of got better at this when I moved off campus because I had my own room, I had my desk within my room that I could work at, but I still very often was just writing on my bed, writing in the couch, kind of doing whatever, whenever. And you know, I was getting work done, I was getting words on the page, and so it's not a big mistake, but I think I could have done much better if I had had a single space to sort of turn my brain on and get my focus in gear so that I could get more done probably than I did like bouncing around and being a little bit more chaotic about that. Mistake number 6 that I made as a newbie writer was not getting involved in writer communities. So obviously here we are now, I'm doing that now, I've rectified this mistake. It's very lonely being a writer, and I definitely felt that at the beginning. I didn't really have anyone I could talk to about my book writing, and so I didn't really have someone that I could just interact with it on that. Not even in terms of like getting feedback for my book, but just having that support system and having people who understand what it's like to write a book and how long of a process that is. And it took me a pretty long time to get involved on AuthorTube and to start joining Discords and stuff like that, because I've always been a very passive YouTube viewer. I find it very hard to comment on people's videos sometimes, and this is still something I'm working on. In my brain, I'm kind of like, well, they don't really care what I have to say. Like, I'm just gonna be a voice in the crowd. It doesn't really matter if I have anything to say about their video or the content or whatever. Even if they're literally asking a question at the end, I'm like, I don't need to answer that. And once I like made an intentional effort to start engaging with the AuthorTube community, once I started joining live streams in the chat, once I joined some writing discords, like my world just like opened up so much, because I didn't realize how many writers were out there wanting to do the exact same thing that I was doing, which was talk about writing. And you may be watching this thinking that, oh, I have to start a YouTube channel to do that. You absolutely don't. I'm a part of a writing group now that has been one of the best things in terms of writing community for me. Half of us are on YouTube and half of us aren't, but we're still all like equally as close and like as interested in what each other has to say. It's not like you have to be making videos in order to join that sort of writing community conversation. And mistake number 7 is one that doesn't really need much explanation, and that is not backing up my work. Thankfully, I don't have like a horrific horror story surrounding this. I've never like lost a draft in the middle of drafting it. I've never had my computer die on me, knock on wood. So I didn't have something that happened that sort of kicked my butt into gear with this, and I'll be honest, still not great at it. I don't do this as often as I should. But I have heard horror stories, and if I were to think right now what on my computer is not backed up that I would lose if it just decided to go kaput, it would be a significant amount of things. One easy way to do this is to just simply email yourself your draft at the end of each writing session. Boom, done, easy. So if you're a new writer, definitely do that, because if you get significantly into a project and lose it, that's gonna be such a huge blow. Like, it's significant enough that if that had happened to me when I first started writing, I would have just quit writing. Like, you don't want that to happen when you're first starting out, for sure. But those are the 7 mistakes that I made as a newbie writer. I hope that this was maybe entertaining or could give you some ideas of what not to do if you are also a new writer. Or if you're not, maybe some things that you're still doing that maybe need to stop doing, like me not backing up my work. If you are a seasoned writer, drop some advice you might have for the newbies down in the comments below, just so we have, you know, some more input, some more perspectives. Or if you disagree with anything that I said, let me know. I'd love to have a discussion about it. My camera's about to die, so I'm gonna go ahead and sign off. Don't forget to go check out the part 2 to this, which is in my Ko-fi blog, 5 things that I did well as a writer, so we can add some positivity into this discussion. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye!